everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Prose Notes, a graduate writing podcast. It is I, Samantha Demerly, PhD.
It is I, Nolan, graduate student.
You can say like
Nolan Shad.
PhD candidate. Oh wait,
I don't know if my PhD. No, I still got coursework.
You're a student still.
I am halfway to PhD candidate.
You're only halfway there.
We're gonna we're gonna find a way to include. We're gonna get DMCA'd one of these days. That's actually
Hopefully
a goal.
Not. We're not getting paid for this. Anyway, welcome back to Prose Notes.
Episode 3.
Episode 3, we're excited to be here back in the studio. It is a very high-tech studio. So today we are talking about first-gen graduate students. This is our... I realized we forgot to do our bit. We should do our bit first.
This week on, I sure did write that because we really enjoyed that bit from last time.
We did enjoy that bit from last time.
We did enjoy that, and we did write that. So we're going to do it again. I guess I'll kick this one off. So I am in a History of the American Culture Wars class, and we were reading about decolonialism and post-colonial thought in education. And we just encountered, they're called coastal Cilician languages, and I just wrote a little note about this in my notes that I definitely went back and rewrote to make more sound academic.
Yeah, read it, Nolan.
Coastal Cilician languages are badass, and you should defo check them out. Go read up on New Hulk, ya jabronis, and I honestly recommend that. Read the Wikipedia page on New Hulk, Nuhalk. They have this crazy long word that has like no vowels or sonorants in it, which those are words like L's, N's, and R's that like have a vowel-like quality to them. There's none of those in there, and it's like 16 letters long.
Wild.
And there's no breaks. And
Absolutely
it's
wild.
Cool as hell. So that was my fun thing because I don't get to do linguistics anymore, and I got a chance to do it now, and I had to just remind the whole class to go do it, you jabronis.
The sentence he just said was written that
is a verbatim
sentence he just read. So
we're being honest.
We're being honest about how
open, vulnerable
about how bad first drafts are. So my little example of I sure did write that. 2 points of context. I keep just a journal in the morning that I write kind of thoughts down for mindfulness practices. I also am in an improv troupe, so you can imagine how these two things come together. I wrote a little poem in my journal the other day, and here it is. It's not good. 2 ideas hit a wall, and then an explosion of color emits from the comedically printed yes and in the crevasse. Snaps.
ASMR.
Writing is hard, and the first draft is always bad, and sometimes you just need to write a bad poem for yourself, is what I'm learning.
Or just a really lame note that definitely you and no one else in the class really cares about.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, in the spirit of writing, we are talking about the experiences of first-generation graduate students this morning. So this episode, as we suggested last time, is going to be a literature review episode. So despite the comedic timings of our opening bit, this is actually going to be kind of research heavy. We've done a lot of reading and compiling of notes. We've written prose notes for...
Whoa!
Oh, it came back around.
They did the thing where they included the name.
Incredible. So we're going to be talking about the research we've done for first-generation students, but specifically tying it into conversations of graduate experiences. And then, of course, because this is partially a Writing Center podcast, we will be discussing kind of how the Writing Center fits into that ecology, how the Writing Center supports graduate students, and especially first-generation graduate students as they kind of navigate these new spaces.
And so maybe the first thing is just worthwhile. I think it'd be worthwhile for us maybe to just discuss what it is we're wanting to accomplish with these episodes, and you kind of hit on that, right? These will be these more like scholarly episodes. And part of it, I think, is just us kind of doing the work for you in a sense of like giving you that primer or that kind of cursory glance at just what's the current status of the scholarship of like topics relevant to writing center work or graduate student life. And so it just kind of just gives us a chance to explore topics that are interesting to us. I can imagine even for one or the both of us, like a project or an article even potentially coming from like the groundwork that we've laid here.
Yeah. We're kind of imagining this as practical in the sense of this is like a non-stuffy conference presentation.
Yeah.
We've done the research. We've been thinking about these concepts for a while. We have a lot of thoughts, but we didn't write a paper about it.
And we won't get any hard questions from the audience.
Yeah, because we are our own audience, which is wild. Yeah, part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation about first-generation graduate students is the concept of, or the topic of first-generation students is becoming much more prevalent in higher ed as we kind of begin seeing that influx of first-generation students into college settings, both 2-year and 4-year institutions. Institutions are seeing the need to support these students and in some cases struggling to support first-generation students who don't have the institutional knowledge that's kind of expected of kind of freshmen even when they enter their spaces. So it's just a really big conversation, but we also think that it's a conversation that's not including graduate students specifically in this kind of network of experiences.
Yeah, and this will become pretty apparent with the discussion we have today, right? But it's a very undergraduate-oriented thing. And yeah, I think it has implications for practice, like for us as an academic support space on campus. So I think it's a very logical and important thing for us to kind of consider. And so part of the angle we'll be taking today is kind of thinking about the label and who gets this label, why do they get this label, and maybe even poking, probing, prodding of is this label, at least on the graduate side, as inclusive as it ought to be.
Yeah.
And so I think, hopefully, I think it's obviously very interesting for us, but I hope this makes for a pretty engaging little topic today.
Yeah, of course. And the final note I think that's pertinent to both of us is that both of us are first generation students in some capacity. I am actually first gen because I realize the generation label comes from your parents, not your siblings. So despite the fact that I do have 2 older siblings who went to college, that knowledge wasn't necessarily passed down in the definitional way that we kind of think about when we're talking about first gen students. So I am a first gen student.
Yeah, and then, so I'm a continuing generation undergraduate student, but we'll kind of make the claim today that maybe I should be considered a first generation graduate student, and we'll talk about why that is. And so maybe the first thing we should do then is just define what a first generation student is.
Yeah, so like I suggested, this conversation has been happening for a while, but one of the first articles we found that started to define first-generation college students, and again, this is kind of the undergraduate version of it, was from the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, where the authors from a 1989 to 1990 beginning post-secondary student longitudinal study, that report found that first-gen students were more likely to be older, have lower incomes, be married, and have dependents than their non-first-generational peers. So that was in early 90s as kind of the first study definition of first-generation college students. That definition, I feel like, has changed a lot in the recent years as, now those students are having kids and are no longer first-gen. It's the kids who are going off to become first-generation students.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that in the extent, or to the extent anyways, that I encountered it, it kind of seems like there's kind of one or two core components to it, and it's did your parents or did whoever's raising you, someone in your family, go to college? And a big part of that, and it's kind of talked about in a number of the articles, is were they able to help you in that application process? Did they know how to communicate to registrars, how to matriculate? Did they know the word matriculate? These kinds of things. Did they have access to that to be able to help you? And so that's kind of the first component. And one thing, at least for what I was able to read, and this was pretty stable, was that you pick this up in undergrad. You kind of enter higher education, and you either get marked as first generation or continuing generation. And then that seems to be pretty stable. Just kind of as an example, we read this really wonderful book from Van Galen and Sablin. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it was a collection of stories of first generation graduate students, but they didn't talk about being first generation in terms of acquiring that with respect to the graduate student status. Almost all of them talked about it picking it up with respect to their undergraduate status, and it stuck with them through the graduate side. And that's maybe something, again, I think we're going to kind of question or at the very least problematize throughout the episode.
Yeah, the Van Galen book, Amplified Voices, Intersecting Identities, is a book we're going to probably talk about a lot throughout this, mostly because it's one of the few books or edited collections that seems to focus on the graduate experience of these things. But we did want to highlight the way that first-generation students, even if they are kind of from, early 90s, described as older, have lower incomes, be married, and have dependents, that there are a lot of underrepresented intersecting identities within first generation.
Yeah, which really kind of complicates the whole picture. And so these are statistics that we were able to collect from the National Association of Student Personnel Administration, NASPA. So according to their report, as of the 2015 to 2016 school year, 42% of students graduating with a bachelor's degree were first-generation students. Of that 42% of the overall undergraduate population, 36% of white undergrads were first-generation. I apologize. So they break it down into different ethnic or racial categories. So of white undergrads, 36% were first-generation. Of Hispanic or Latino students, 60% were first generation. For Black and African American students, 59% were first generation. For Asian students, 39%. And then for AAPI, 54% were first generation. And then they also included a gender breakdown in that they, in their kind of survey, 60% of first generation students were female. And so it's just really interesting, right? So there are a lot of minoritized identity groups that make up a very large share of who these first generation students are.
Yeah, one thing we noticed throughout the course of this research is that there are two categories of characteristics or kind of social identity that actually come up a lot in the research. One is economic class.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe the second isn't necessarily a social category, but that writing as a skill, as a way of determining intelligence in most situations is a kind of key concern for first-generation students. That taking tests seems to be fine, but it's the writing skill where students notice kind of that
where the wheels kind of start to come off the wagon. Yeah. And so part of what we'll be talking about today is some things kind of related to class. And this isn't to say that the other identity groups aren't related. It's really important, and these things intersect. In fact, we got a really cool chance to go to KU's first ever first generation graduate student kind of conference week. And it was interesting as an educational researcher, just to kind of look around the room, because the student population very diverse, but the admin's still overly white. And so it is a very diverse student population. But part of this is you can't divorce class from things like race and gender, because that's going to it's going to impact your access to cultural capital. And that's kind of the point that in Volume 2 that Van Galen and Sablin kind of talk about, is that the students in their narratives didn't necessarily talk about the class aspect of things. They maybe talked about monetary problems, which we'll get into later, but as the compilers and the editors of the kind of anthology, they talked about how what they saw was this constant theme that's kind of, it's the undercurrent that's kind of tying all these different groups together. And so that's just kind of my angle as a scholar anyways, so I appreciated them talking about that, but we just wanted to bring that up because we think it's a really important thing to kind of consider as we're considering this kind of student population, because I don't know that universities do on an institutional level. That's not, it's like, it's not the point that they have when they provide first gen kind of programming.
Well, and, from a service perspective, that, the institution seems to want to support students is from this equality standpoint, maybe not necessarily equity. And so everyone gets equal support, but that may not necessarily provide the needed level of support for a first generation student versus somebody who is a continuing generation student and maybe just has a little bit more understanding of how to move about this space.
What gets obfuscated, and it's kind of our last note here, first gen, as you talked about, they tend to be older. Are they non-traditional students? Where do international students fit into this picture?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Can you be all of these things at once?
Yeah, I'm working with a student right now who is working on like international student research. And what's really interesting about that, and an entirely other podcast episode, but international students are not supported in the same ways that traditional students are.
Right.
And in a lot of situations, at least in my experience, there seems to be this kind of, you wring your hands and you go, oh, I don't know how we're going to help them. But they're here. They signed up for classes. They're paying tuition.
They're thousands of miles away. Yeah.
And they probably need more institutional support than the institution would ever be prepared to provide them.
Yeah. And again, thinking about things from like a language perspective, yeah, sure. Like there's a difference in helping a person write who I haven't written an academic article or paper in 10 to 12 years versus I'm writing a paper in not my first language. But I think these things, and I think this is one of our perhaps strongest claims, is these things can and do overlap.
Yeah,
and I think institutional supports should be cognizant of that and consider the ways that these do overlap and inform one another, because we're all multiple identities at once. Yeah, and so it's just a really complicated, neat little picture. And so part of it too is, right, when you're thinking about like a research article, you have 1,200 words or 12,000 words. You have a word limit. And so if you're going to talk about this, you're probably going to talk about one of these categories. So there's part of it of just these like isomorphic pressures in the terms of there's just what an article will allow you to cover. So perhaps these scholars are also thinking about it in this way, but don't have the space. But we do have the space. We have all this. We have all the time in the world in this podcast to talk about this. And so we're going to kind of try and wade into those waters. And so, really important, interesting question.
Yeah, the pressures we have here are not in terms of focus. I mean, we're going to try to stay on track for our dear listeners, but we get to jump around a little bit in terms of the way we're thinking about these intersecting identities without the pressure of saying, I am going to focus on just this one particular identity.
Just the values of multimodal kind of scholarship.
And I actually think this kind of question of intersecting identities bleeds into our kind of next theme or question that we asked for this project, which was, how do first-generation students see or perceive themselves? And we found a few different articles, and again, the Van Galen book as well, but there was an article by Penrose in 2002 called Academic Literacy, Perception, and Performance, where one of the more interesting findings is that first-generation students do not perceive themselves as lesser until they get to college. It's until they step foot on the campus and start to interact with other students who may be interacting with them in a very particular way that they start to question themselves, which don't even get me started on imposter phenomenon. Like, these students did not perceive themselves as not being prepared beforehand. It was only when they got here that the rug started to be pulled from out from under them.
Yeah, and so, it's this idea, right, of it's in large part about just the comfort you have in kind of navigating these academic spaces that you're engaging in. And, the fact that it is even happening at the undergraduate level, kind of the tamer level in terms of what's going on in the academy. It's really, really interesting. And so, that was a really wonderful article coming out of North Carolina. South Carolina, one of the Carolinas. Really interesting. And so, yeah, and so they tied it to literacy and kind of comfort levels that these students had in reading and engaging with articles. And yeah, all of a sudden, where there wasn't any discomfort engaging in writing and engaging in kind of the more technical aspects of just academia in general is where those discomforts started to manifest. And yeah, and so it's interesting of, there's not a deficiency mindset in this population coming in, and then all of a sudden there's like a wall that they hit and they go, oh crap, there's a thing here that I don't have.
Yeah.
And so then, so again, we've talked about it a bit, the Van Galen and Sellen amplified voices. Just really wonderful. It truly was a pretty wonderful collection. So Volume 1 is graduate students talking about their life as graduate students. Volume 2 talks more about them trying to enter professional spaces. But it was really valuable to kind of have this collection of graduate student writing. And again, similar concepts of just a lack of awareness of kind of rhetorical moves to be making, kind of how to position themselves within their departments, all these kinds of things of they kind of feel like perhaps they had peers or counterparts who were able to more successfully navigate these spaces and kind of came in with background knowledge that they were able to tell that they didn't have. And we can see the world around us and you can tell like, oh, this person, why are they having this line of communication? Why are they having this meeting? Why were they chosen for this project or group and I wasn't? And it can be related to all of these things. And if you don't know why those things are happening, especially at the graduate level, you can really begin to feel like you don't belong there.
Yeah, the belongingness aspect was something we noticed a lot in these articles and these books, is that most studies were finding that belongingness was kind of a core part of first-generation undergraduates specifically succeeding in collegiate settings. However, in most situations, there were fewer chances for them to belong. Like, there were not the structures set up to bring them into the fold in the same way that, continuing generation students might be able to tease those things out easier. One of the quotes that I really like from the Van Galen book is in regard to the kind of intersecting identities of this question of first generation. And they say they may arrive at college being able to at least name the racism, sexism, ableism, and homophobia that they'll encounter, assuming that they're going to encounter it. They may be less likely to anticipate the condescension, deference, shame, guilt, envy, resentments, arrogance, contempt, fear and mistrust, or simply mutual incomprehension and avoidance that typify relations between people of different classes. So this goes back to that class dynamic. So yes, we can kind of identify the racism, we can identify the sexism, but at least from the Van Galen point of view, classism kind of came to the fold as being the leading deterrent for first-generation graduate students.
Yeah, and, it might, to some people, seem perhaps like not like a novel thing. Like, it's really expensive to go to undergrad. And a lot of them talked about that, right? In terms of just like, it's a financial risk I'm taking. I don't know what I'm going to do afterwards. I've got money for the coursework, but as soon as I'm ABD, I don't, where's that kind of revenue stream? And so, those risks and kind of susceptibility to kind of economic hardships that a lot of these students talked about, for sure, were a common like thread. Again, thinking about that thread that's connecting all these together because it was really diverse. There were just a lot of different identities, and kind of the point of the book is these different identities were at the forefront of these authors' minds of I'm a mother, I'm a Black woman, I'm a gay man, all of these things, and yet again just what's tying them together is just their relationship to class and kind of how that positions them kind of within the academy. Do you think it'd be maybe valuable just even to illuminate some of these things, is just even talking about our own like undergraduate experiences as a first generation versus a continuing gen student?
Yeah, so I was first generation college student. I remember thinking that I'm supposed to go to college, but really I had no idea why. Very little sense of kind of what it was going to do for me. And it wasn't that my parents, weren't supportive. It's just that like we didn't have those kind of clear conversations of what is the purpose of this. So I went to undergrad and kind of fumbled my way through for the most part. I switched majors a few times, just trying to kind of find myself. And, I did have a very and my identity, cis white heterosexual woman, I'm kind of very basic in most situations, and I did have a kind of beautiful little kind of growing experience of I found literature and I became an English major and I began to love that setting and those classes, and I really felt like I was learning and I was growing as a person. But what's interesting compared to my between my undergraduate experience and my graduate experience, I got really good at being a student in undergrad, and I was praised for that. Faculty members were like, "Wow, you're a really strong student. You should go to grad school." And I said, "Cool, absolutely. That sounds like a great idea."
What's grad school?
What's grad school? I had no idea what the space was, and most people just described it to me as, shame on them, a continuation of undergrad, a continuation of coursework, of thinking about these texts and reading and doing this research. And that's what I thought it was going to be. So I remember the wave of uncertainty my freshman and sophomore year of undergrad. And then I kind of got my bearings junior, senior year. And then I went to grad school and felt that whole thing again of, this is different. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the goal is here, because I went into both of these spaces with very, very little sense of what I was going to get out of it.
Yeah, and so that, I think, contrasts, for the purposes of this episode, very nicely with my undergraduate experience, what happened to me. And, when you think of, motivations for going to either undergrad or graduate school, so, there was just that implicit understanding that I was going to go to undergrad. And probably an expectation or a hope that I would go to a graduate school. That my mom thought I was capable and encouraged me, and I appreciated her support in that. But yeah, so when you think of kind of the cultural capital, and what cultural capital is kind of access to knowledge that kind of helps you move about society and spaces. So in this case, the cultural capital was embodied cultural capital, and I took the ACT for the first time as a sophomore.
Wow.
And then took an ACT prep course, based off of the score that I got, to kind of see what I needed to improve on, take the right ACT prep course, and then took it again as a junior.
I didn't know you could do that.
Right, exactly. And so it was because my parents knew to do these kinds of things. They were able to help me through this application process.
Wild.
And it worked out. I mean, I think that's a very large part of why I got the scholarship I got from Truman State University. I took it early and got a respectable score early. And so I got early kind of letters from different universities, different institutions, and they even helped me kind of work through what institutions I wanted to attend. I knew what degrees I was thinking of pursuing as a junior. I was interested in Russian linguistics and physics, or kind of some scientific category like that. So I narrowed down my college choices as a junior in high school to institutions that had all three of these different kinds of things. Junior year, I did the college campus. I went and visited different campuses. And so, it was a very parent-involved process, because they had both gone to undergraduate programs and had received academic scholarships when they went. And so, they kind of helped me understand of the work I would need to do to maintain the scholarship that I wound up earning to Truman State. And they even were able to talk me through just what it's like to live in dorms, and how to make friends in undergrad, and kind of how to get involved on campus, and maybe don't take an 8 a.m. math class like I did my very first year. We had these conversations.
Wild.
And that's what continuing generation, and that's the claim, right?
Yeah.
This is what continuing generation students have access to, that first generation students do not. The way I was able to move about undergrad from the word go is implicitly different than what you were able to.
Little Samantha is so jealous.
But then you get to the graduate side.
Yeah.
None of my family had gone to graduate school. And you talk about imposter phenomenon and just a lack of belonging, maybe less at the master's scale, but now here in this PhD program, just crashed like a wave. I didn't know what course number level I am allowed to take. I'm honestly still a little fuzzy, hazy on that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to stick to like mostly 800 and even 900 level courses.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea of like, I have to take courses outside of the ELPS department. For a long time, I didn't know if that meant outside of the School of Education or just like as long as it doesn't say ELPS, is that counting towards my degree progression? So yeah, I felt just this wave of like, I had felt very comfortable and confident in navigating through undergrad and honestly through my master's program. I feel very fortunate to have gone to Truman State. I guess this is a KU podcast, but a plug for Truman State. I was taught exclusively pretty much by PhDs throughout my whole undergraduate kind of coursework. The ones that I didn't have were the Russian language courses, which we had Russian Fulbright scholars come teach the language courses. So I was even able to talk about what it is to go to graduate school a little bit and the application process. But man, once you get on campus and you're on your own, I felt so isolated, and I thought I knew, and I didn't. I just absolutely did not know what this space was and what it was all about. And so it's for those kinds of reasons that, it's like all of a sudden, like, oh, I'm a first-gen graduate student. This is new, and I can't call upon some other person's knowledge to kind of help me in this instance.
And I think that's really powerful. One, because from the research we've done, this is, I think, the point of kind of why we want to have this conversation, because there are no scholars out there who are talking about specifically this first-gen grad student kind of phenomenon, that we're getting a lot of graduate students who, because their parents don't go to graduate school, they don't have the institutional knowledge to navigate that same space in the same way that our undergraduate colleagues and continuing generation students can.
Yeah.
So I will say I did have graduate student friends when I was in undergrad. So this was something that did help me in the transition to grad school. It was still hard because I wasn't going to, I went from Ohio State to Indiana. They didn't come with me.
Right.
So I was still kind of navigating that space on my own and trying to make new friends within my IU cohort. But I did have a little bit of a sense of what was to come. But my grad school friends, they were my friends, but they weren't sitting me down and saying parenting me. They were my friends. Yeah. And so there was a little bit of kind of passive understanding of what they were going through, but never explicit advice or instruction of how to navigate these spaces.
Well, and that's even a really good kind of segue into this next point, and I think it's worth kind of thinking about, and it's related. So at Truman State, there are graduate programs. There are master's programs. One of the most common things you can do at Truman State is get a 5-year MAE, Master of Arts in Education, which, if you think about it institutionally, kind of like its positioning, it's a master's certification. Yeah, sure, but it's just a continuation of your undergrad. And so, they're not leaving campus. Sure, I imagine the coursework gets a bit more rigorous, but there's this kind of connection of this master's to the undergraduate program. And one of our friends here at the Writing Center, Alex, went to Oklahoma, also did that, right? So he did undergraduate and his master's wrapped up into kind of one institutional experience and then came to a PhD program. Me, I did it differently. I did a 4-year undergraduate degree and then a 2-year master's, and now I'm in this PhD program. So I've kind of experienced if there's this sliding scale of undergrad to graduate level coursework, for me, the transition came post-masters, where I felt like my master's, it was good, it was rigorous, it was very practically oriented. It felt closer to my undergraduate work and the style of work I was doing, so I felt more comfortable as a master's student than this PhD level. Whereas there's the third model, which is right, of undergraduate to...
I got out of undergraduate, and I did not have a master's degree. My master's degree I got along the way to my PhD. So all of the coursework that I was taking at IU, as soon as my coursework for my master's was done, I was just already taking courses. And there was a semester where I was taking both my master's coursework and my PhD coursework because it all counted towards this particular degree. So my joke was I just literally picked it up along the way. I didn't have to do anything different. I didn't have to reapply.
So you didn't even walk as
Yeah,
part of it.
I did not walk for my master's. I do have both degrees
Yeah,
on my
yeah.
wall because might as well. But it didn't feel like I was getting my master's. It just felt like I was getting a PhD.
Right, and so again, I think as we're trying to complicate the picture, I think whether you want to call it a degree model, an institutional model, whatever term, because we haven't decided a term on this, the chart and the history of your coursework, I think, also informs your relationship. Because, like I said, the imposter syndrome, imposter phenomenon didn't really kick in at the master's level. I had an idea, but the PhD level, it's just been a whole new beast, and that's where it's really kind of kicked in and entered in, kind of for my own personal purposes, I guess, for lack of a better word.
I mean, I think coursework at the graduate level is still different than undergraduate coursework. There's still that expectation that you are contributing to knowledge making, that you are analyzing and kind of putting ideas together in a more critical way than you would, say, in an undergraduate course. However, it's still coursework. It's still a structure. It's still a syllabus and grades and expectations. And for a lot of graduate students, like, whether or not that's hard for you, it still doesn't compare to having the expectation that you have to do this dissertation on your own, or you have to do this master's degree or master's thesis on your own, without the structure of a syllabus, without somebody telling you what to read and kind of when to read those things by. So I'm not surprised to hear that, like, that was kind of the big shift for you. It was still a major shift for me. I think my one kind of thought about my dissertation was that I got senioritis at the end of my master's degree, quote unquote master's degree. I did not get senioritis before then. So I was so ready to, like, start my dissertation. I was, like, excited to go off and do my own research because I was kind of actually tired of going to class and learning on somebody else's time.
Well, and so just maybe to put it in words or analogy or whatever is, the jump from high school to college was honestly pretty easy for me. I welcomed kind of the added challenges and I was able to take coursework I was interested in. I got to start to specialize in undergrad. And then the leap from my undergrad to my master's was a very manageable kind of gap to jump. But then this gap for me from master's to the PhD level, that's where, without the supports that I have had, you included and the kind of other people in the department, like, that's when I needed kind of the community and the team around me to kind of bridge that gap. And so I think maybe that's kind of a useful analytical way to think about it, of when does a person begin to not be able to traverse the gap because of either the cultural capital or just their own pre-existing knowledge.
Well, and graduate school is so complicated because even making connections in graduate school, there are so many external and internal pressures. Say, you have to teach classes. There's the pressure to publish, and so to focus on your research in, a different particular way. So kind of even building up that network, I think, is harder in graduate school because unless you got lucky and had, like, a really tight cohort to start, it's going to be an uphill battle to find people and find time to kind of get together and build up that camaraderie. And sometimes, those networks are difficult to build because faculty members do have sometimes have the expectation that you should know what you're doing. And so that fear of asking, that fear of kind of outing yourself as, I don't actually know what the next step is, I don't actually know what to do in this situation, is going to keep you from asking for the help that you actually need to succeed in that space.
Well, and it's just so hard because the act of asking, right, you're positioning yourself as not an expert. And the whole thing of grad school is we're experts. Or we like to pretend that we're experts, right?
We like to pretend we are.
And so, and that's, again, what came through so many of these narratives is just the fear of being vulnerable in that way because it might make you seem weak or unknowledgeable or even undeserving to be here. Other people know how to have these questions, have these discussions with advisors or whatnot. The community thing, for me, really interesting, really, I think is a really crucial component to this. Because again, like undergraduate, there's clubs and organizations, and there's probably an activity fair of like where all the orgs come and you can see which orgs you fit. And I haven't felt that at the graduate level. And I didn't feel it at my master's program. And this is, I think, part of both of the things I'm talking about, for sure impacted by COVID, just people's like presence and being able to be on campus and be present. It's hard to get engaged. But yeah, without being a GTA, I don't know that I'd be as well integrated into the department as I am, just because there are GTA meetings. I've talked to other GTAs, and also in part because my cohort is not very cohesive. We all have very distinct professional goals, whereas coming into undergrad, all of my friends' professional goals were to complete undergrad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the motivations for going to graduate school, I think, are actually far more diverse than that motivation for going to undergrad. Like most people who go to undergrad want to get an education so that they can graduate with a degree that they are proud of and kind of go off and do job. Like,
it's a credential you can exchange for a job.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas the motivation for going to graduate school is like this weird amorphous cultural capital thing or financial, but it's really not financial anymore. I cannot express that enough.
Yeah, just word of advice. Make sure you want to go to graduate school.
Yeah, please make sure you want to
and
go
don't dig a hole for yourself.
If you're here and you're questioning
find funding. Find an institution that respects you.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, it's tough because even beyond that, yeah, I think there is this kind of societal expectation, or that is at least trending towards, getting an undergraduate degree. And there's this educational historian, David Labrie, and he talks about this. Just lots of educational researchers talk about this. We're an over-credentialed society. You have, it's the thing that you have to have a bachelor's degree and 10 years of prior experience to get an entry-level job. Just the qualifications are getting higher and higher and higher, and I think that's impacting and driving in part graduate school enrollment. It for sure influenced my decision. Like, I don't want to enter the workforce, but also, I have these questions. I have a desire to be a scholar, and contrast that with just your own reasons and experience for going to graduate school of being more amorphous. And so I think you're right. There's a greater breadth of rationales, reasons, motivations for people winding up in graduate programs. And not that they create a self-fulfilling prophecy, but if they are amorphous, or like we experience in the amplified voices, if you're just told to go to graduate school and you don't really feel like you know what's going, or like, you don't have that confidence, you're going to for sure feel like, God, I don't know what's going on around me.
Yeah, it is always, honestly, it is almost embarrassing when I think about how little thought I kind of put into some of these decisions. And it's not to say I didn't think about them. It's that I literally, and this is the first gen experience, I didn't know what they could give me. Everyone just said they were a good idea. I mean, even just going to undergrad, like, not that I had any other kind of thoughts or considerations outside of that, but everyone just said it's a good idea. You're going to get a degree, you'll get a job, and move on. But that was like the conversation. There was no more specificity to that. So then when the conversation started for, oh, well, you're a really good student, you might do really well in graduate school. I remember distinctly being very proud of that classic Samantha people pleaser. Faculty members were impressed with me, and so I wanted to kind of continue writing that intellectual high of doing well to impress, this kind of intellectual community I was trying to build. There was one grad student in the English department who, when I got excited and I told him that I was going to grad school, he looked at me and he said, "Don't," with fear in his eyes. And I got really defensive, and I was like, "No, I'll be fine. I can handle it, blah, 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 blah." And man, that guy was right. I mean, I'm happy where I'm at, but like,
no regrets.
No regrets, but
maybe
also,
a couple.
but he was
right.
But he was the only person
who
that questioned the plan.
So a question, and this just came to me. So do you think part of it, right, is you coming into this space, feeling the rug pull, feeling unconfident, but then you get that institutional recognition of, like, you've conquered this space, you're good at this space that you came into with no skills, you've caught up and, in a certain sense, surpassed your peers around you. Do you think that in part affected your decision then to continue along of like, oh, I can do this
Absolutely.
because I nailed it at this level
Yeah.
and they're telling me I'm nailing it at this level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my narrative would have been different if those faculty members had either ignored me or not kind of given me that praise that really directed the thoughts I was having about kind of next steps. The other part of this conversation was I was majoring in English. I really didn't have any idea of what to do afterwards. So at some level, grad school seemed to be the only option for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it was. There are plenty of options for English majors in terms of like communication and a lot of different spheres. I had skills. I have skills. But at some level, it started to feel like grad school may be the only option.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't. But nobody told me, except for that one guy. Nobody told me otherwise.
Well, and it's just interesting coming out of a linguistics program and as a social science and kind of not one as well known as, say, sociology or psychology, there was kind of those discussions of like, oh, it's tough to be a linguist. And it is tough to be a linguist. It's tough to do lots of things, but there's also plenty of career opportunities for linguists. I wouldn't change a single thing I did. But yeah, there were at least a couple of discussions from like my undergraduate advisors at the very least of like, well, if you're not doing computational linguistics, maybe think about a thing like applied linguistics in terms of being able to kind of have that career path. And so, at least I was encouraged and they were happy and proud of my decisions to want to pursue a graduate degree. But I got fair warning.
Yeah.
At the very least. So I in part knew not the coursework and the system and the culture that I was getting myself into, and I don't think they could have prepared me for that.
Yeah.
But I knew like the job marketplace I was kind of getting myself into.
That's good. I mean, one of the articles we found was Lunsford 2011 when first generation students go to graduate school. So this was one of the few articles we found that actually kind of talked about
those transitions.
Yeah. But this one was specifically from that professionalization perspective. So graduate students who are first generation kind of move into the professoriate. How do you help them navigate that professional development towards faculty positions and towards academia proper? And what I thought was interesting about this is one of the questions or one of the comments that Lunsford suggests is that faculty members should be talking to their graduate students about goals, about why they are here, about what they plan to do with this degree, and have very candid conversations about whether or not this is for you. But I thought it was weird that we're having these conversations at the graduate level and not the undergraduate level. So maybe it's just this is where the conversations are happening and we're not getting enough kind of late stage undergraduate support in that regard. But it did seem to be kind of an interesting dynamic to me that we're only questioning decisions once we're in the system.
Well, I feel like part of the implicit assumption is, part of applying to graduate school is you write a statement of purpose of like, why do you want to be here? And it's just an exercise of telling the committee what they want to hear. And you should, have genuine reasons and whatnot. But I wonder anyways if the implicit assumption is a project or a writing task like that is sufficient to make a person think about these questions.
What was your statement of purpose on?
What was it on? Just kind of my reasons for transitioning from linguistics to kind of education policy. I took a very language policy kind of angle.
Cool.
Thinking about kind of K through 12 language policy and who gets labeled ELL, ESL, and those kinds of supports. My interest very specifically is in the Midwest. You have a very white teacher population, but a really diverse linguistically student population and kind of what's going on in kind of these ESL, ELL classrooms where you've got white teachers teaching really diverse populations. And then, it was kind of trite, but it was honest of talking about my mom going on her own.
Yours is not trite compared to mine.
getting her master's in education to kind of support herself and my younger brother and just I was inspired by her kind of foray into education, and I was like, and she would just tell me all these problems that she would encounter as a teacher, and I was like, I can research that, Mom. I can help.
Oh, that's really sweet.
And no, I can't. It's hard, and I've changed. I'm no longer. I mean, I'm interested in K through 12 stuff, but I've moved into this kind of writing center, higher ed space.
You can do it all. Don't worry about it.
I hope so.
You can do it all. It's fine. Real fast. Mine was because when I applied for graduate school, I thought I was going to be a Miltonist. I thought I was going to study John Milton for the rest of my life and read Paradise Lost every single year of my life. I wrote my statement of purpose on the kind of the idea of personification. So I think I started with a gambit of like, when people think of pride, they think of hubris and blah, blah, blah. But pride can also be a good thing, very like basic literary analysis kind of thing. But when I started graduate school, I was very interested in the kind of personified characters. So characters that are personifications within narrative structures that don't necessarily fit them. Yeah. So sin and death in Paradise Lost was like the topic of my undergraduate thesis. So I thought I was going to do that. So I had this whole thing, and fun story about me. One of the first intellectual threads that I can trace back to when I was a kid was reading Full Metal Alchemist and seeing all of the homunculi characters, so the 7 deadly sins, like acted out as characters. Yeah. I thought that was rad as hell. So I'm here because of Full Metal Alchemist.
And so I think, though, like coming from these like statements of purpose and kind of the things you have to do to get into graduate level, to get to that next stage of the academy, I think that sets us up for kind of just like our next question of how did I first know I was an outsider when I realized the things I wrote about was kind of bullshit. My statement of purpose has had little bearing on my existence as a PhD student. Because I how could I know all the things that it would be? And so it begins to get into this idea, educational scholars will talk about this, of the hidden curriculum. What is assumed knowledge that some people have and others don't that allows you to navigate throughout these spaces?
Yeah. It's such an interesting question. I started realizing that I wasn't necessarily built for graduate school was when I took my very valid perspective of I'm smart, I'm intelligent, I can figure this out on myself, and it didn't work. Like, you can only figure this out by yourself at the wall so many times before you start to hurt yourself. And it had worked for me in undergrad because that system is a little bit more generous with its hidden curriculum.
The edges are a bit more rounded,
The edges are a bit more rounded. But I remember moments in coursework where people were saying things and sentences that, as a native English speaker, just struggled to understand. I kind of felt like an outsider, especially in these social circles, or like department events were kind of weird to me at first. Like, I didn't know if this was casual. I didn't know if it was professional. To be honest, there were a couple of moments I got way too drunk at a party because I thought it was a party and it was supposed to be like a department thing. Yeah. And kind of got some slack about that later.
Well, an alcohol culture at the graduate level is its own kind of, at times, pernicious thing. But those things do happen.
Yeah. So I feel like there weren't like big moments of, oh no, I don't belong here, but there were so many small insidious moments where I just felt uncomfortable in spaces where everyone else felt very at ease, that it was kind of that moment where you look around the room and you go, everybody else knows something here I don't. And I don't know what that is. And I don't know how to ask the question of, like, what do you guys know?
Right, yeah. And again, kind of like I talked about earlier, for me, it really was that bit of what classes do I? How am I supposed to know what classes I'm supposed to take? Like, again, at the PhD level, it's supposed to be, like, specific and tailored to my interests, but yet there's this course kind of the course plan, there's the outline of like, I have to take XYZ courses and like research and, departmental courses. But there's really one core course that the education department requires. It's Education 800. And then after that, you like hyper tailor your coursework to your own interests. And part of it is, my own waffling interests and kind of not feeling confident as a scholar in this space for the first time. And that was the first time I never felt not confident or unconfident as a scholar, as opposed to undergrad and even my master's level, where in undergrad, there's tons of courses you just have to take. At the master's level, it was like 36 credits for me, probably 12 to 18 of those were like required courses and the rest were electives. But then all of a sudden it's all electives. And it's like, how do I choose? How do I know what I'm supposed to choose? How do I know if a course is going to be on topic, or even like courses that have prerequisites? Like, am I allowed to just hop into a course with a prerequisite because I'm a PhD student? Or do I have to go take like the master's course to then get into the PhD level prerequisite course? And so these questions that either I was intimidated to ask my advisor about, or just he didn't feel available at times. I mean, all of these things, this kind of perfect storm of just like, oh, I truly feel lost, happened when I arrived.
Yeah. One thing that I will say about my own experience, and again, this is kind of something we mentioned earlier, is that writing was a skill that felt very difficult all of a sudden in graduate school. Granted, I feel like I gave myself a leg up with all of the writing center work I did, because in most situations, I was exposing myself to other students who were writing similar things or different things in different classes, but at very high levels. And so I was like slow drip rhetorical analysis to myself through the writing center work that I had been doing both at undergrad and in graduate school. So as difficult as writing was, I at least, and maybe this is like kind of how I ham-fisted my way through grad school, was I at least felt relatively confident about my writing skills because I was constantly working with people on their writing.
I never thought about it, but that's actually, I mean, it's a really good point. Like, I do feel my job that I feel very lucky to have gotten for sure helped me acclimate, just being surrounded by other graduate people who are writing. And one of the claims of this whole podcast, like, not this episode, but Prose Notes, is that writing is kind of the thing of grad school. It is what grad school is you write, you produce writing.
And for first generation students, this is entirely new types of writing. So even if you got through undergrad and you were like, okay, cool, this is what school is like. I've kind of made this comment to a few graduate students before, but if you were comfortable writing a like 10-page paper, all of a sudden that gets ramped up. You're now asked to write a 15 to 20-page paper or a 25 to 30-page paper, heavily researched, effectively cited, all of these new rules, new expectations. And because of the way that graduate curriculum is organized, you're not being taught how to do that.
No, you're assumed that you know how.
Yeah, and it's an entirely new skill level. And then your kind of description of the rug being pulled out from under you and having now more freedom in writing. A lot of graduate students, even if they're relatively confident through coursework, it's the dissertation that throws everybody off, because now you don't have that structure. Now you don't have a syllabus. You don't have a built-in literature review, and you are being asked to compose this massive project ostensibly on your own.
Yeah, and it's tough if you think about what a dissertation is, right? It's this highly individualized thing. It's this niche project that you care about. And so it's individualized, but still there's like disciplinary norms of what a dissertation is supposed to look like, of what it includes. So like how much freedom do you really, like there's all these questions that I think just kind of crop up. And so at the undergraduate level, like, you do your writing, you do your term paper, your course paper, and it's just kind of a rinse and repeat thing. But like, writing is such a long process and an intimate process at a different level at the graduate level. So to surrender your writing to honestly also a harsher or more rigorous level of critique, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's real hard.
And feedback is not something that you were ever trained to receive at undergraduate. Feedback is not often part of undergraduate curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you're even receiving kind of a new new dynamic
Yeah.
to the writing process at the graduate level that most people don't handle well. And that's true across the board.
Yeah. And so then even just related to that, right? Like undergraduate, kind of like I was talking about, rinse and repeat. You write the 10-page paper, you don't do anything with it again, really.
Yeah.
But like the graduate level, it is iterative. It has to be iterative.
has to
Otherwise, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
And I've encountered that of like my old habits of I can write the paper, in the week leading up to when it's due or even the day or two before. Don't need to like take time to edit and revise. Totally work through undergrad. I didn't rewrite a single undergraduate paper and it worked. Not at this level. That's just that cannot work for me. And so part of it is me having to train myself. And again, working at the Writing Center has been really helpful because it's provided kind of the framework and the context that my department has not necessarily. There's just not time in graduate coursework a lot of the time to talk about the ins and outs and the depths of the writing process. And so I think that kind of segues into kind of just one of the overarching themes, right, as we're reading all these articles and encountering student narratives. Just this theme of I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And part of it, how can you ask for what you do not know? And you can't, and it's hard, and you just have to either have the skills or the luck or whatever to either have an advisor who's willing to spell these things out for you, or hopefully your eye can catch it when you encounter it.
So we hope that graduate students who either identify with first generation status or are just feeling kind of lost in this way that most students do at graduate school, we hope that you come to the Writing Center.
Yeah.
One of the things that we think is valuable about our space in the Writing Center and kind of using our services and us as a resource throughout the writing process is we are, what did we say? The safest, coziest version of support. We pride ourselves in being non-judgmental. We acknowledge that graduate school is hard, that writing in graduate school is hard, and that as we as we pointed out at the beginning of the episode, our first sentences or poems are not very good. And that's okay too. So part of the point of this little statement or this little plug is that writing centers are actually fantastic resources for kind of acclimating to different institutional spaces, but we're kind of claiming specifically for graduate students this graduate institutional space because writing is so quintessential to the work that you do. We think you deserve a safe, non-judgmental space to practice those skills. And really, that's, I think, what we do best is a safe, non-judgmental space to practice your writing.
100%. And even thinking about last episode, and if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it about coaching versus consultations. This idea that like part of the work we do both as coaches and writing consultants is demystifying kind of this process of graduate work and understanding what these layers are to just being part of the academy and producing knowledge. I make it an explicit part of my practice to kind of explain hidden curriculum aspects if and when I can and as it's appropriate, because a lot of, I think, our discomfort in writing and uncertainties that we have can come from not understanding what kind of the institutional purpose is. Like, what are they trying to get out of this exercise? If you have a hard time understanding that, it can be really hard to understand going about the writing kind of in the first place. So if you're kind of gelling with what we're talking about, if your parents didn't go to grad school, if you feel that kind of imposter, like, I don't know what's going on around me and other people clearly do. That's a thing we can help with. And we love to help you with. And it's a safe, welcoming, comfortable space.
One other element of this, and this is not specific to the Writing Center, but I've heard a lot of kind of administrators talk about this recently, but shadow CVs. So one thing that academia or higher ed institutions are really good at are hiding failure. We are excellent at saying, I've won all of these awards, grants, here are all the papers I've published, and everything else gets pushed under the
The
rug.
articles that you tried to get in and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Not on the resume, not on the CV.
So the idea of a shadow CV, and this is something that's becoming a little bit more common. So if you feel like you would like to have a candid conversation with your advisor or with a mentor about failure, about those moments when every scholar kind of doesn't succeed, doesn't get that published, ask for their shadow CV. A lot more faculty members have been encouraged kind of as a mentoring strategy to build these things up. And it's literally just a list of everything you didn't get accepted, everything you didn't get published. And what I think is valuable about this, especially for first generation students, is to know that most of the things you're seeing are finished final projects that hide all of the messiness and the work behind them. So the nice thing about a shadow CV is it also demonstrates that sometimes you put in a lot of work for something and it just doesn't get accepted or it doesn't get published. And that's okay too.
I really do like that. And I hadn't encountered that idea until we started preparing for this episode. But no, it's a really kind of, again, like comforting idea. And I think part of what's comforting about it is I like graduate school. I like what I'm doing. It's an alienating process. And it's tough because it can alienate you or isolate you, one, within your graduate program, but kind of a complicated part of it, it can alienate you from like family that you have around you, and, there might be support, and especially for first generation students, and authors talked about this, carrying the hopes and dreams of whether it's their whole community, which is a massive pressure, or even just their household and, of being the first person to do those things.
Yeah.
But then, this idea of you come back of you're in the ivory tower of academia. Whether or not you actually feel like you're high up in that tower is kind of irrelevant. There's a gulf between you and your parents or your community or whatever, because they, are likely or prone to see you as having this particular kind of knowledge. It can really put you into conflict. I know I have to explain to my grandparents like all the time, like what it is that I'm doing. And I say the same, and they just don't know what it is that I'm doing. And so it's tough. And so again, I think coming to the writing center space, even if I don't know what it is you're working on, I know what it means to be a graduate student. And that's community in a word.
Yeah, it's building community and having those connections outside of the academy and outside of academia, I think is really important to
make friends.
Make friends, try to make friends, find community in town. Like if you're in Lawrence, if you're, around town, Lawrence is a really cool, vibrant town. Find community there. What helps about that is it gives you points of comparison of how other people are moving about the world and how your work can complement or contradict or critique or intersect with the world around you. I think a lot of graduate students think that they need to spend as much time reading, writing, and doing their work in order to be a good scholar. Go out, be in the world. That makes you a good scholar.
Go watch a movie, go to a cool restaurant. Like, just take that time for yourself. And I think that's a form of just advocacy for yourself. And I think one of our overarching, and this was recommendations that came from Amplified Voices, or this is a theme that emerged. And it has been true in my own experience, and I think yours as well, of just, it's really tough to be an advocate for yourself. That's one of the scariest things to do. And part of that hidden curriculum is actually knowing that you can do that. Like, it's scary. And again, a thing that we as graduate coaches and graduate writing consultants can help with, we can help you construct an email to an advisor or help you ask for like timelines and like feedback from your advisor. I've been working with a person kind of for the last month, and she's getting ready to defend this winter. And I just helped her work through a timeline of like, okay, you're, turning in the last draft of your dissertation or this kind of initial final draft. If you haven't heard back by this date, I would email. And here's how I would email and ask. Because, she just didn't feel super confident in being able to ask those questions. And so, like, that kind of framing and knowing that you can advocate for yourself is really important. Like, the institution won't always treat you with respect, but you ought to demand respect for yourself. Be seen as a full human, a full person. And that means you have stuff going on in the academic community and out of the academic community.
We hope that you're faculty members and your institution respects you. We hope that you get the respect you deserve as somebody who, again, we're kind of speaking to first generation graduate students in this particular podcast, but know that this is also not a space that celebrates success overtly. So find respect, but also find joy in where you can. One of the things that I really encourage all students to do is to build in celebration for those little wins. And this can be a sliding scale of celebration, but if you get accepted to a conference, celebrate that. That's exciting. If you finish final papers for the semester, celebrate that. I know you're probably tired, but try to understand that these are successes, that you are succeeding when you are making these little movements forward. And if you can't feel the success for yourself, come to the Writing Center and we'll help celebrate.
We'll celebrate. Yeah. And you're absolutely like, it's always on to the next thing in academia, but take that time for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a really good way to celebrate those successes, and it's a phrase I like to use, is just embrace the mundane. And I think I said that in episode 1 of just, you don't have to be like the top, most lauded, acclaimed scholar in the world. Like, care about the things that you care about. And part of the beauty of graduate schools, you get to choose that for yourself, what that is, what that means. And so, if you get into a conference, that's awesome. And there are people who applied and did not get into that conference. And that's just that's one of the realities of these things. So like, celebrate every little success because it's worth it. And like, life is built up of all these mundane moments. And when you add them up, that's when for me, the beauty really enters. Because you get to be a niche. Like, you get to be, as I say, like, you get to be one of the 12 people in the world who cares about this topic. How cool that you care about that, because it means I don't have to spend all my time caring about it, and we can meet in the middle and communicate, and that's how knowledge is built up. So, just the everyday things are really, and it feels like such a self-help or like, pop psychology thing, but these everyday things are really valuable, and you can kind of lose that, I think, in graduate school really quickly if you're not mindful of that.
First-gen graduate students are doing the damn work. They are out here every day.
Stretched so thin.
And we see you. We appreciate you. We want you to be here.
You deserve to be here.
You belong in this environment. And we hope that either you can, feel these things that we've been discussing, that you can identify these things we've been discussing, but know that we're in your team, we're on your side. We want you to succeed in graduate school. We want you to succeed in these spaces. So that's, I think, the last thing I want to leave our listeners with. We've got some cool, shorter episodes ahead of us. This is a beefy episode.
This is probably about as long as one of our episodes is gonna be.
Should ever be.
yeah. But no, next we're planning to do kind of this other series that we've been planning called Writing Center 101, and we're just gonna walk through kind of the 3 types of appointments you can make at the KU Writing Center, what we feel the pros and cons are. And, we each kind of talk through our preferences and what we feel like you as a person, as a client coming to us, what would perhaps be the most impactful or helpful for you. So these are going to be very practical, for sure less kind of theoretical than like the lit review episodes, perhaps less of kind of like a chill conversation. Like the first 2 are just like, this is very much like, hey, like if you're trying to get these things, this is a very practice-oriented kind of 3 episodes that will be coming up next, but I think they'll be really interesting too.
Yeah, I'm excited. We kind of want to do these episodes just demystifying. Demystifying higher ed, so kind of talking through why we do what we do. But that is our plan for the end of the semester. We are getting things ready for spring. We have another whole slate of cool topics for the spring.
We have so many topics.
We're going to be bringing in some guest hosts and possibly interviewees, so we're very excited for the spring semester, the summer, and next fall.
Planning to kind of just ramp up production. We're hoping to generate transcripts of these episodes to link online so that you can also read them. For lit review episodes, we'll post our references.
Yes, we will post our references, especially for this one, but also for our other episodes in the episode descriptions. But we're excited that this project is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
It's just a wonderful thing. I hope all of you who listen, I hope it is valuable for you, and I just hope it continues to grow and we build this wonderful community. So no, we're really excited for everything that Prose Notes has coming up, and we hope you are too.
Happy writing, everyone.
Happy writing.
Have a great end of this. Wait, no, not the end of the semester. Have a great day. Goodbye.